Hey, what's going on, everybody? How y'all doing? And welcome to another episode of Riley's Talk. So I'm quite sure by now, the past couple of days, you've seen different news broadcasts talking about how we have this vaccination coming out. It should be coming out within the next few weeks, or by the middle of the summer. We should have hundreds of millions of people vaccinated. So the title of this video is COVID-19 Forced Vaccinations and Why Some Refuse to Take It. And there are multiple reasons why a lot of people, and some of these reasons are legitimate. Some of them are kind of fugazi, but a lot of them are legit, is why a lot of people will refuse to take it. But also, can the government force you to take it? So let's get right into it. Can they make you take it? If so, how? As I just said, what I mean by who is the government. The big bad government, whether that is the federal government, your state government, your city government, what have you. But before we get into anything, the short answer is no. The long answer is yes. And the real answer, it depends. And that's where we're going to focus on the it depends part. But how? So a couple of brief history lessons. We're going to talk about smallpox and polio. And there's a reason why we're going to talk about those two in particular. They were two diseases from back in the day. Smallpox was in biblical times, and polio was still around in the early 1940s and 50s. So they did a lot of damage to the human population. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about the history of vaccines. And as I just said, smallpox. History of smallpox. The origin of smallpox, actually. The origin of smallpox is unknown, but smallpox is thought to date back to the Egyptian Empire around the 3rd century BCE, before the Common Era, based on smallpox-like rash found on 3 mummies. So the earliest written description of a disease that early resembles smallpox appeared in China in the 4th century CE. Early written descriptions also appeared in India in the 7th century and in Asia Minor in the 10th century. So smallpox, as I just said, smallpox has been around quite some time, and it did a lot of damage to the worldwide population. How was smallpox spread? Like any other thing, when civilizations meet, especially back in the day, in the 14, 15, 1600s, when civilizations meet, they bring disease with them. So remember from history class back in the day, we learned about the Silk Road, the trade routes and stuff like that. Well, on these routes came mice, on these routes came fleas. They also bring their diseases with them. So sometimes one population may be immune to a certain disease because they've had it for so long, but the population that they interact with is no longer immune to that disease. So what is smallpox? And I'll let you go over and read this on your own, but we'll just kind of go through it real quickly. Smallpox is a virus. Symptoms of a smallpox infection begin with a 2 to 5 day period of high fever, malaise, backache, followed by the development of a rash. So that sounds like pretty much almost any disease out there. 2 to 5 days, a rash, coughing, sneezing, and things of that nature. The rash starts with red bumps that are flat to the skin, but progresses to raised bumps, blisters, and finally scabs. The time from the beginning of the rash to the formation of the scabs is about 2 weeks. So, the rash of the smallpox is deeply embedded in the skin. Residual lifelong pock marks, basically scab marks on the skin, often occur following resolution of the illness. Now pay really close attention to this right here. About 30 out of every 100 people infected with smallpox will die from the disease. I want you to keep that in mind. That means 30% of people who contacted this disease back in the day pretty much died. It pretty much was a death sentence for a lot of people. And again, if you did not die, you had lifelong scabs, you had lifelong, complications from the disease itself. And smallpox is pretty much spread from person to person, large droplets from the mouth and throat of people who have the disease. This means it is spread by coughing, sneezing, or talking. Now, as you can see, these bumps is pretty much the old school nasty version of smallpox. Now, smallpox was so bad that it pretty much wiped out an entire civilization. During the Spanish conquest of the Americas, Mexico, especially the spread of smallpox from Europe to the New World, contributed to the decimating of the Aztec Empire. So you ever wonder how and why a lot of people from Mexico speak Spanish? Well, there's a reason for that. Back in the 13, 14, and 1500s, when Spain was the America of its day, they conquered Mexico, and pretty much with them, they brought smallpox and their language, of course. So they conquered Mexico, but as I said in the previous slide, the people of Mexico had no immunity to smallpox, but it had been in Europe for years prior to this. So the people of Spain had the immunity to it. So this goes into it a little bit more for you history buffs. In 1518, the Aztec Empire included about 30 million people. By 1568, the estimates are that only 3 million people remain in the area covered by the Aztec Empire. So that's a 50-year period. What happened? As I said, for you history buffs, look up Hernan Cortez. And what he did was he landed in Mexico, followed by more Spaniards from Cuba a year later. Now, they brought an African slave with them who had smallpox. Cortez actually, this is kind of some other stuff that I kind of, glossed over with because it's not an Aztec history class. But basically, that one African slave was dropped off in Mexico somewhere, and he had smallpox. And that is literally how smallpox got over to the Americas, more specifically Mexico. And within 50 years, 30 million people died. Now, this is 1500s. 30 million people was probably 20% of the entire world population at that time. So this is not like where we have 7-8 billion people in the world today. This was a significant part of the population. Now, smallpox was so bad at that point in time over the years. Keep in mind that smallpox comes around since biblical days. At some point, some smart people, some scientists of the day, they got together and said, how can we control it? So they controlled it by a process of variolation, which is pretty much the older days of a vaccine. So for those that don't understand how vaccines work, and I've unfortunately found out that some people don't, I had someone tell me a couple of weeks ago, like, why are they putting it in you? Well, that's how vaccines work. Well, at this time, what they did was a process of grinding up dry smallpox scabs from a smallpox patient and inhaling them or scratching them into an arm of an uninfected person. It's being used in China and India to control smallpox. So pretty much that's what they do, how a vaccine is made or administered. They take a virus. It's typically dead, but they inject it into you some shape, form, or fashion. Your body then looks at it and says, okay, this does not belong here. Whatever it is that they just put it does not belong here. We need to get rid of that. That's what your body is telling pretty much this disease that's in there. So your body builds up, aka an immunity to it. So it learns how to fight it off. That's pretty much the purpose of vaccinations in general. So that's how they end up controlling smallpox. Now, the other illness that was still around, and like I say, in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s was polio. Polio is an acute contagious viral illness caused by the polio virus. It affects the muscles and nerves throughout the body and may cause permanent paralysis or even lead to the death. Now, polio also did have a vaccine. Now, in 1954, a virologist, don't know what that is, think of Dr. Fauci, the guy you see on TV every day. This guy, Jonas Salks, after years of research, he created the polio vaccine. At the time, this was the first vaccine that completely eradicated a disease. Now, eradication does not mean get completely rid of it, but it practically does. By 1990, after an extensive world vaccination program, polio was eradicated totally. Again, it was the world's first vaccine to eradicate a disease. Now, this after years of research. The research on the polio vaccine started as early as the 1920s. He was the guy that just kind of took the earlier research, added his own sprinkle to it, and voila, here you have the polio vaccine. So, first off, let's go over some pros of vaccination. One thing about me, I am not an anti-vaxxer. I have taken vaccinations numerous times, so has my child. I am not an anti-vaxxer. I'm not trying to scare anybody. But there are pros and cons of vaccination. So let's go over some of the pros of it. They protect children from disease. Of course, we all want to protect the children, especially babies and stuff like that, because guess what? They are usually the most vulnerable. I mean, babies, if anybody have children, you already know they catch every little disease. Like my daughter, when she was 6 months, she had hand, foot, and mouth disease. I had never even heard of that. So they definitely protect children from disease. They are safe and effective. Now, this one is kind of tricky. In my opinion, generally speaking, they are safe and effective. Growing up, I have not seen a case of chicken pox in I don't know how long. I've not seen a case of measles. Measles in certain parts of the world are extremely deadly. Those of us in the U.S., we're not really worried about measles anymore. Like I say, I haven't seen chickenpox. I think I might have been part of the last generation that caught chickenpox. They also prevent the spread of disease. When more people are vaccinated against the disease, fewer people can catch the disease. When fewer people can actually contract an illness because they've been vaccinated against it, the spread of the disease can be easier to control, manage, and end. They also can save time and money. Treating vaccine preventable disease is costly. Parents must spend time away from work, and medical bills can pile up very quickly. Anybody that has ever had a hospital bill, you know that's true. So some vaccine preventable diseases can also lead to permanent disabilities that require long-term care. Now here are some cons of vaccination, and these are this is going to be a part where we're going to go over a very lot. So some of the cons: parents should get to decide what treatments their children receive. Because some vaccination laws can prevent unvaccinated school-aged children from attending public school, some parents feel pressure to have children vaccinated. We're going to go over this later, and I'm definitely not a fan of this. A good example, the HPV vaccination, the human papillomavirus vaccination. It's a virus designed to stop an STD. I have absolutely no understanding why are we giving children a vaccine to stop a potential STD. I guess it can lead to ovarian cancer, especially in women. But this was like one of those vaccines that's going too far. They can cause side effects. Most side effects that result from vaccines are mild and usually present as soreness at the injection site. So I remember all the shots I've ever had. Usually they were scary and they were definitely sore. But the two I definitely remember was while I was in the military. And we had to take a smallpox shot and an anthrax shot. That smallpox shot hurt like hell. And I mean, my arm swelled up, and that scab 20 plus years later is still there. Some guys had completely allergic reactions to them where they were completely passing out. But I guess, especially being in the military, which brings me to my next point, the cause of vaccination are human guinea pigs. This is a huge sticking point, especially amongst minorities. And there's a reason for this. We're going to get to that. Another con: never let anybody fool you. People do what they do for profit, especially in America. These are the 6 companies that are jockeying for position to create the COVID-19 vaccine. That's Johnson & Johnson. I'm quite sure most of us have heard of them. The baby powder, Tylenol, that's what makes Johnson & Johnson. AstraZeneca, whether you've heard of them or not, you've seen their commercials numerous times. One of them depression drugs that they make. Moderna, I cannot pronounce that properly. Pfizer and BioNTech, Novavax, Sanofi, GlaxoSmithKline. These are the big 6 companies that are, again, in competition for the vaccine. They are going to get paid big bucks. Don't believe me? Let's check out their market capitalization. Novavax, they're a baby. They are a complete baby amongst the other ones. They're still worth $8.6 billion. Johnson & Johnson, we all have Johnson & Johnson products in our houses. I can guarantee you we do. $394 billion. Pfizer, $223 billion. AstraZeneca, $141 billion. Moderna, $60.35 billion. You see how this is going, correct? Their whole goal is profit. And the problem in medicine and just a lot of things that within vaccine research is people will put profit over safety. Don't believe me? Purdue Pharma. You ever heard of them? You probably haven't, but if you haven't, you've heard of their product, Oxycontin, oxycodone, or whatever you want to call it. This is one of the primary reasons why there is an opiate crisis. They knew for a fact before it hit the market that their product was highly addictive. They knew this. Do you think they cared? Hell no. They went from a little company that could to being worth billions beyond billions. And it is a family-owned company. It's not like they're Johnson & Johnson where they have this huge corporate office. No, it is a very small group of investors and family. So they became billionaires within a couple of weeks. And they knew this product was highly addictive. Excuse me, I got to go back real quickly. As I said, human guinea pigs. Throughout history, Black, brown, and other marginalized communities have always been test subjects on new projects where the effects aren't fully known. And I mean, this is no matter where it is, especially in America, A lot of African Americans, Native Americans, Hispanics have always been used as test subjects. It's just, and this is one of the reasons why you're going to get a lot of pushback when this vaccine starts coming out. One of the biggest reasons why is this one. The Tuskegee syphilis study. From 1932 to 1972, thousands of African American men, most who were sharecroppers with the promise of free health care, participated in the Tuskegee syphilis study, administered by the United States Department of Public Health. And now here's the funny part. In 1947, there was already a medication for syphilis, but the men were never informed of it. In some cases, they were even infected. This is before the days of Medicaid and Medicare. Now think about the time frame here. 1932, that's when it starts out. So in some cases, these men are probably at best one generation fully removed from slavery. So they're poor. They have no access to regular health care. Again, this is before 1965, where Medicaid and Medicare are not even on the market. We're 30, 40 years away from that. So if you all don't know who this is when Bill Clinton back in 1997 apologized to them for the study that had been done against them. Investigators enrolled in the study a total of 600 impoverished African American sharecroppers. Of these men, 399 had latent syphilis, with a control group of 201 men who were not infected. As an incentive for participation in the study, the men were promised free medical care, but were deceived by the Department of Public Health Services, who never informed the subject of their diagnosis, despite the risk of infecting others and the fact that the disease could lead to blindness, deafness, mental illness, heart disease, bone deterioration, collapse of the central nervous system, and death. So most of those folks that like gangster movies and stuff like that, if you can recall, Al Capone, the Chicago gangster, he was never gunned down in the street. He died of syphilis. That's what killed him. So these people had no telling how many people were truly affected by this study, this alleged study. Primarily, these men were minority, poor, uneducated, and unaware. And even the government has accepted that the 40-year Tuskegee study was a major violation of ethical standards and has been cited as arguably one of the most infamous biomedical research study in U.S. history. This was a horrible idea. It was horrible. So you can't be mad, especially at minorities who are not going to jump at the opportunity to take this virus. We have seen this or heard about it numerous times. As I said, I'm 39 years old. My grandparents were born in the 1930s. So I'm pretty sure my grandmother, my grandfather, the two people that raised me, they probably could easily have been in this study. Very easy, especially being from Mississippi. Tuskegee is actually not far from Mississippi because it's in Alabama. Now, let's go and get straight into the issues. Vaccines take years of studies and tests. I mean years. Vaccine development is a long, complex process, often lasting 10-15 years and involving a combination of public and private involvement. The current system for developing, testing, and regulating vaccines during the 20th century as the groups involved standardize their procedures and regulations. So when it comes to vaccines, here's something most people don't know, and you can Google this on your own if you don't believe me. The flu vaccine is only about 40% effective. Now this is after years of research. Years and years of research. Now they come out with a new vaccine every other year or something like that because the flu changes, of course. But it's only 40% effective, and this is after 10-15 years of research. Before we even get to human consumption of a vaccine, of course we have to start on the animals first. So normally guinea pigs, rats, mice, what have you, primarily because they're mammals and the things that affect them affects us the same way. That part takes 5-6 years alone. Once you get past that part, then there's a first human trial where a couple of people get together and allegedly are informed of what they are taking and the potential side effects. So they might get a couple of people to do this one, about 10-20 people, depending upon how bad this particular person is affected by whatever they're trying to use the vaccine for. If that goes well, then you bring in a bigger control group. All I'm saying is that it takes years, I mean years, for these vaccines to get where they are. And this is the problem. This is the major problem we have, and that's this vaccine is hitting the market entirely too fast. Again, most vaccines take about 10 to 15 years minimum, sometimes more, to hit the market, but yet this one is magically hitting the market in less than about 2 calendar years. Let's go over COVID-19 discovery. COVID-19, its actual name for those that don't know, it's the coronavirus disease /2019, was officially named December 31st, 2019. Now, the epicenter of the initial outbreak was the Wuhan province in China. By January, it started making its way around the world rapidly, and in February, parts of the world, especially China, went into lockdown. COVID-19 targets the lungs, so you're more likely to develop severe symptoms if you have a pre-existing lung problem. Your risk of serious symptoms is higher if you have these conditions: COPD, lung cancer, overweight, and the elderly. It was declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization on March 11th, 2020. Now, this right here, now you can go to this website up here that I got this stat from. The coronavirus recovery rates. I'm going to go straight to these two right here. As of this moment, the highest that the lowest recovery rate is 97%. Remember earlier in the video when we talked about smallpox, I told you to remember that number that 30 out of every 100 people died in smallpox. That's a 30% rate. Now, at the very worst, coronavirus is a 3% death rate. Now, nobody wants to be a part of that 3%. I really get sick and tired of people when they come to me, well, it could be you, it could be, you're right, it can. But I personally, one of the people that, this is kind of off the subject, but I just don't believe we should shut a whole world down over what's essentially a 3% death rate, and it can be as low as 0.25. I'm going to assume the truth is somewhere in the middle of those two. So even on a bad day, let's say 2%. The recovery rate, because 97 to 99.75% of people recover from coronavirus, is one of the primary reasons why people feel that this pandemic is entirely overblown. So let's get into the primary question I asked at the beginning of this. Can the government make you take it? Well, sort of, at least indirectly. Don't believe me? Government power persuasion. Like most things, the government can make you do it, but they can't make you do it, but they have numerous ways to convey you to do it. Your job can mandate it. Your children's school can mandate it. In order to receive certain benefits, they can disqualify you from them. So, example, I'm a veteran. They could easily pass some type of bill that says that I cannot get VA medical care unless they have on file that I received the coronavirus 19. So I live in Chicago. Mr. Riley, you cannot come in here because you cannot get medical care unless you take this shot. They can, some shape, form, or fashion, pass a law and do that. As stupid and bad as it sounds, it can. Again, the government power persuasion. On a national level, this is kind of crazy. On a national level, let's say, you know how in America we have states' rights. So the federal government can create a law and say, you know what? You have to do this. State like California can say, no, we don't. They're not going to do it. Okay, the government cannot make them do it. But what they can do is take away funding, and they've done it before. The National Minimum Drinking Age Act of 1984. Ever wonder why the drinking age is 21 nowadays? Well, it used to be states set their own drinking age, and it was what it was. What they did was, though, the act would punish any state that allowed persons under 21 years of age to purchase alcoholic beverages by reducing its annual federal highway appointment by 10%. So basically, you were going to lose your highway funds if you did not do what we told you to do. Pretty good power persuasion, don't you think? And pretty much overnight, everybody pretty much did it, whether they wanted it or not. As you can see, it's just an act, it's not a law. There's a big difference between an act and a law. So that's exactly how they pretty much made everyone do it. Another one, especially if you're a male or if you have a male son between the ages of 17 and 25, the Selective Service Act of 1917. Now, these are, for those that don't know what the Selective Service is, we have not used a military draft in America since about 1973, I think, right after the Vietnam War. But prior to that, you had to register for the Selective Service so they could draft guys for war. These are some of, still to this day, although you don't see them prosecuted, these are still to this day some of the things that can happen if you do not register for the Selective Service. If required you can be fined up to $250,000 and 5 years of imprisonment. Unless a man provides proof that he is exempt from registration requirement, his failure to register will result in a referral to the Department of Justice for possible investigation and prosecution. Funny, isn't it? In addition to potential criminal repercussions, Failure to register may make a man permanently ineligible for certain benefits. And also, each individual state can levy different consequences against you. And what are some of those benefits that you may end up losing out on? Most of them are federal, but if you don't, even still to this day, if you have a 17-year-old or 18-year-old son and he does not apply for the selective service, guess what? He is not eligible for any government grants. That means college, not just loans, grants, what have you. He will get no money for college. Now, but some people don't realize that they end up registering some shape, form, or fashion years later. If needed, you can't qualify for government housing. And you, like I said earlier, you can't obtain any form of federal employment. Nothing. You are completely shut off from all forms of the federal government. You also, as usual, have the schools. As I said earlier, they can mandate your schools to take them. So every state law has laws that require children to get certain vaccines before they can go to school or to daycare. Yet parents can opt out of one or more vaccines for medical, religious, or personal reasons. Vaccine exemptions vary from state to state. Some states make it easier to avoid vaccines than others. Usually those are going to be in your more red/Republican/Southern states. That's just kind of how it goes. A lot of it is religious based, whatever. Lots of working parents can't afford private school or attend homeschool. So back to COVID. Let's pretend your state decides to say, you know what? Let's pass a law that we are going to make people take this COVID-19 vaccine. It's very easy to say, you know what? My child is not going to take it. But guess what? Now you have to educate your child. You can send them to private school where the private schools don't have to worry about it. But private school can cost, we have a school here in Illinois that costs, $35,000 a year to go to. So again, it all depends upon your state and if it's public or private school. But yes, the government can find ways to make you do this. Unfortunately, here's a very extreme example. Let's pretend that you have been diagnosed with COVID, but you didn't get a vaccine. Now, you don't die yourself, but you pass the vaccine on to somebody else, and that person dies. Guess what? You have a manslaughter charge. At the very least, murder at the worst. Now, this is an extreme example, but we all know of examples of the situation, like AIDS. You can't knowingly pass AIDS on to somebody. That's kind of almost borderline murder. So yes, these are some extremes the government can make you do, not directly, but at the very worst, indirectly. So let's recap. Can the government make you take the COVID-19 vaccine? Can they make you? No, but indirectly, unfortunately, they might be able to. Millions will refuse to, at worst, take the first round of vaccines. Now, I've said this about myself. I am not going to be in line when this vaccine come out. And again, I am not anti-vax. I have vaccinations. I'm fine with getting them. But I am not going to be one of the first in line when this vaccination comes out. And there's a reason for that. Vaccine takes years before they hit the market. As I said earlier in the video, sometimes 10, 15 years. This one is hitting the market in less than 2 years. I'm not trusting of it. And the reason why, because of human guinea pigs. Especially as an African American myself, we have a history of being used as guinea pigs, and also being a veteran, we were forced to take that anthrax shot. We were forced to take a smallpox shot in a war that these things didn't even exist. But that's another story I'm not even going to get into. Lastly, and just as important, big pharmaceutical companies are in the business to make money, which lowers ethical standards. As I said, Purdue Pharmaceutical, the creators of Oxycontin or Oxycodone, whatever you want to call it, they knew for a fact that their product was highly addictive. They knew what their product was going to do. But guess what? They made billions and did not care. So as always, thank you for watching Riley's Talk. Do me a favor, if you like the video, please hit the like and subscribe button at the bottom of the page. Have a great day.